and its geographical and social characteristics. Therefore, a few years ago, we pushed through the General Climate Change Law in order that we achieve a model for our country, and we established a national participation system among local governments, as well as municipal associations and Congress representatives, like all of us here today. On the other hand, in 2020, Mexico became the first country in the world to have a sovereign bond to fund the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals to a total cost of $809 million, and this was to achieve our UN commitments. Parliamentary powers are key, colleagues, in this fight. Legislating on sustainable infrastructure, management, clean energy, green jobs, and the rule of law, as well as environmental protection, is key. Finally, I wanted to share with you that we need to be aware of the historic challenge that we have ahead of us. We need to be receptive to all ideas and to all proposals that allow us to accelerate our responses to achieving a green future for all. And that is to say, for coming generations. Through great institutional technological change, we have a real opportunity to ensure that global warming does not go above the goals that we've set. We need to resolve the issue of climate change because this needs to be a priority for all governments and all parliaments across the world. There is no planet B. This is the only planet we have. And if we have time, the time is now, in fact, because we're late. We cannot simply conform. We cannot just be inert. We need to do everything we can because people are depending on us. And so we need to tell people what we as legislators can do, and we need to be up to the task. We need to save our planet, colleagues, and we need to take legislative action. We cannot wait. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Mexico, India, and I call upon Angola to come and sit on the next speaker's seat, please.
Honorable Chairperson, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to the Chair for according me an opportunity to express my views on the subject. Distinguished delegates, as we all are aware, humanity is facing the biggest existential threat today in the form of climate change. The temperature of our planet Earth has been rising continuously, and the warmest 6 years on record have been all the years since 2015. India has been at the forefront of global climate action, despite having only 5% responsibility in emissions. India's non-fossil fuel energy has increased by more than 25% in the last 7 years, and now it has reached 40% of our energy mix. Our country is on the track to reduce the emission intensity by 35% much before the stipulated time, that is 2030. This is remarkable in the backdrop of India's effort to lift millions of people out of poverty, as India has around 13% of the world's population today. India achieved the 5th global position in solar power deployment and 4th highest wind installed capacity in the world. India is reducing CO2 emissions, CFC and HFC emissions in line with our international obligations. In the 26th session of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26, held in Glasgow, India, represented to the world 5 nectar elements, Panchamrit of climate action. It contained the target to reach net zero emission by the year 2070, along with other targets of increasing its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts and meeting 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. This shows the collective will of the nation to contribute maximum towards the cause of our planet Earth. India firmly believes that the issue of climate change and global warming is not country-specific, but is interdependent in nature and requires cooperation among nations at the international, regional, and bilateral levels. As a result, India has been central to the establishment of the International Solar Alliance and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. During COP26, Prime Minister Modi, along with Prime Ministers of United Kingdom and Australia, launched a new initiative for technical assistance and capacity building in island states called the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. Prime Minister also launched the Green Grids initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. GGIOSOWOG will bring technical, financial and research cooperation to help facilitate cross-border renewable energy transfer projects. All these show India's leadership in the international climate cooperation and resilience. Our nation is working with a wider global vision to build a world order based on energy justice, climate justice, and economic justice. It is imperative today that all the stakeholders contribute to the climate cause. The role of parliaments and parliamentarians is at the heart of our climate change response. As parliamentarians, we can play a very crucial role towards environmental protection by sensitizing decision makers, policy planners, and those responsible for the implementation of various climate obligations. We must ensure that our government fulfills its responsibility in that direction. Parliaments could help transform the international climate obligation into national legislations with short-term and long-term goals, and also hold the executive accountable in fulfilling those goals. As the vital link between the constituents and the governments, parliamentarians could use the debates and discussions in the House to highlight important issues for the attention of the executive. Parliaments, through legislation, could incentivize the use of green alternatives during the production processes for transitioning towards green economy. Parliament could also consider imposing additional costs on the usage of polluting and emission-intensive sources of energy. They could ensure that the climate intervention of the country is inclusive and leaves no one behind. India has passed many legislations related to protection and conservation of the environment. We also had a long discussion in our parliament regarding climate change, where a large number of members articulated their views and concerns. Members of parliament have also used various procedural devices like questions to hold the executive accountable on matters relating to climate change. Our parliament's departmental related standing committee on science and technology and environment and forest has also been constantly evaluating the functioning of the ministries concerned. We must establish a robust system of research and development to develop newer ways to reduce emission and also to capture the emitted carbon sustainable. Parliamentarians must remain in touch with the latest development in this field in order to demand action from the executive as well as sensitize the people. Last but not the least, we must share the best practices and learn from each other's experiences, knowledge and expertise. Mutual cooperation amongst us will surely lead to solution to the problem of climate change. On this positive note, I hereby conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Next is Angola, and I'm calling upon Australia to come and sit on the next speaker's seat. Thank you.
Your Excellency, distinguished MPs, ladies and gentlemen, welcome all with the peace of God. On behalf of the National Assembly of Angola and the Speaker and myself, I welcome all of you in this General Assembly, which brings us together in this welcoming city of Bali. Parliamentarians from all over the world in a combined effort to act promptly towards climate changes which the planet Earth and humanity are facing. Your Excellencies, Angola considers climate change as one of the biggest challenges that humanity is facing. On the one hand, direct and indirect impacts which causes the nations to face economic and social problems, and it's a real challenge to the development of nations. However, the transnational nature of this phenomenon, including its causes and effects, represents a test for multilateralism, which is the reason why we are gathered here today. No single state can itself implement policies and actions to protect itself from the harmful effects of climate change, or can either contribute to mitigate its causes. This conviction is not just related to information provided by science, namely through this panel, Inter-Parliamentary panel, under the motto, Getting to Zero. I make the most of this opportunity to welcome the hard work which has been done in this field, but also because of all the findings which have been found at national level. Climate change caused by human action, without a doubt, are clear. Evidence is visible. Increase in temperature under various forms and natural phenomena whose consequences are disastrous for the lives of the people and for the environment. The Republic of Angola is vulnerable to the effects of climate change and is well aware on the impact which the country has been facing. As we improve our understanding on the behavior of climate change parameters at a national level, it's clear that the shortenings and worsening of the cycle of floods and droughts that plague the south centre of the Republic of Angola is clear. In addition to this, climate change directly affects food security, energy security and public health. My country is bathed by the Atlantic Ocean and has 1,600 kilometers of coast, where 45% of our population lives, and they are exposed directly to the risk of rising sea levels, just as the entire country is associated with the risk of the souring of oceans and the consequent impact in the decrease in marine biomass. Your Excellencies, for many, many reasons, climate change for my country is an issue of development and is an issue to fight poverty. The geographical location of the Republic of Angola in southern and central regions of the African continent is also worth mentioning, since these effects on climate change is considered as a powerful element of conflict associated with the availability of water resources, a decline in land productivity and the consequent migratory movements of people and animals. The awareness that has been formed regarding the needs of mitigation challenges the Angolan Parliament and the Executive to make it easier and meet the vital needs of the population, whilst at the same time safeguarding the environment, mitigating the impact of those processes. However, the path taken towards modernization and the development of our countries shows that it is possible to work on raising awareness and enacting legislation and budgets which dovetail for sustainable investments and infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, in this regard, the National Assembly of Angola has approved the main conventions, protocols and legislation that make up the climate change regime based on the challenges imposed by the human and sustainable development process. Your Excellencies, the Angolan government adopted the National Strategy for Climate Change for 2035 as a political tool to guide long-term national climate action inspired on the long-term development strategy and identify the risks caused by climate change and opportunities for the adoption of compatible technologies in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Your Excellencies, we are aware of the anthropogenic contribution to the causes of climate change. So, although Angola has contributed very, very little to the current concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we still need to adopt a carbon development model that restricts the warming of global temperature below the 2 degrees as regards greenhouse gases. Ladies and gentlemen, we congratulate the IPU for organizing this assembly and for the topic which you chose. Our commitment is that all parliaments together and united can contribute in targeting the motto, reaching zero. To the authorities and people of Indonesia, in particular the city of Bali, our thanks for the warm welcome and hospitality. So we wish you a fruitful outcome. Thank you very much.
Bola, thank you. I now call upon Cambodia. And next, United Arab Emirates can come and sit on the next speaker's seat, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. President of the IPU, Mr. Secretary General of the IPU, Honorable President of Parliament, Honorable Chair, distinguished delegate, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the host country for organizing this physical event and the historical and cultural rich and eco-friendly city despite difficulty posed by COVID-19. Concerning the theme of the IPU 144 Assembly, there has been long evidence that human activity are among the main cause of global warming. The negative impact of climate change on human livelihood, health, well-being, water resources, agriculture, and food are getting more severe. In recent years, we have witnessed more frequent and intense natural catastrophes. No single continent or no place on earth is free from climate change. Honorable distinguished guests, Cambodia has been prioritizing solutions to climate change and the national development agenda, including the formulation of climate change strategic and sectoral plan. My country recognizes the urgency of taking action to address climate change, including mitigation and adaptation. In accordance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. We have supported global effort to respond to climate change by joining the UNFCCC in 1996, the Tokyo Convention in 2002, and ratifying the Paris Agreement on Climate Change in 2017. In the recent 11th Asia-Europe Parliamentary meeting ASEP 11 held in Cambodia, water, food, energy nexus under changing climate was discussed, followed by following by the adoption of ASAP 11 Declaration calling for global solidarity and Asia-Europe partnership to address these cross-cutting issues facing humanity. On 30 December 2021, Cambodia submitted its long-term strategy for carbon neutrality to the Secretary of the UNFCCC. The document plan balanced key areas fundamental for long-term national development, including greenhouse emission reduction, economic growth, social justice, and climate resilience. At the 26th Conference of the Parties, Cambodia emphasized its commitment to address global warming by not allowing a new coal plant project, 2, not permitting hydro dam construction along the mainstream of the Mekong River, and 3, seeking to achieve zero greenhouse gas emission from the forestry sector by 2040. Cambodia has just launched a 400 megawatt solar power plant, which amounts to 15% of the power generation in our country. Honorable distinguished guests, the issue of climate change requires multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approaches to tackle them. We would like to suggest the following key solutions. 1, building a synergy of parliament across regions of the globe to enact laws and regulations that respond to individual and collective effort of respective countries to achieve zero carbon or carbon neutrality target. 2, enhancing multilateralism and collaboration among key stakeholders, including government agencies, development partners, private sector, national and international organizations. 3, providing protection for the vulnerable group and implement intervention for livelihood improvement, natural disaster response, access to clean water, sanitation, sustainable management of environment and natural resources, and the use of environment-friendly and efficient technology. 4, ensuring financial assistance, technology transfer, capacity building, and necessity support for development countries from developed countries so that climate change can be addressed collectively and more effectively. In closing, honorable parliamentarians of the world, I wish you all every good health, happiness, and prosperity, and above all, that there will be peace in our planet. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Cambodia. Next is United Arab Emirates, and sitting on the next speaker's seat, Australia.
Mrs. President, Excellencies, Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It is my pleasure to extend to you, on behalf of the Emirati Parliament, our deepest appreciation to the Parliament, government and people of Indonesia. I would like to thank them for their efforts in order to host the endeavors of the 144th IPU Assembly that are being held amid a lot and increasing regional and international challenges that are threatening international peace and security. The Emirati parliamentary delegation stresses the importance of solidarity between different parliaments of the world in order to have a stable and secure international environment through innovative solutions to face international challenges. In addition to this, we should promote multilateralism because this is a platform that gathers all the cultures and nationalities of the world through the representatives of international parliaments, we reiterate the importance of parliamentary efforts in order to reach the best solutions, in order to disseminate the culture of coexistence and peace amongst people, because this is the best way in order for us to have tolerant cultures in a bid to reach international peace and stability. We also reiterate the importance and responsibility of parliaments in prohibiting the speeches of hatred by increasing the role of parliamentary diplomacy, by resorting to dialogue and the peaceful settlement of international crises. This is what we've been doing in the UAE, by enacting laws and legislation to combat hatred and extremist speeches. We also established Hidayah and Sawab centers in order to support the international and national efforts aiming at combating terrorism in addition to speeches of hatred. We also signed a humanitarian document in 2019 which includes principles that represent the importance of peace and coexistence between the world civilizations and religions. We consider that our parliamentary diplomacy is important more than ever in order for us to be able to promote international law and international humanitarian law in a bid to preserve international and regional peace and security. Parliamentarians should have real contributions in this regard. The Houthi terrorist militia is conducting aggressions against civilians in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates. This is a blatant violation of international law. It is a real threat to regional and international peace and security. Therefore, the UN Security Council issued a resolution number 2624 condemning the activities of this group and describing them as terrorist activities. We hope that the decisions of the IPU during this assembly will be in line with this UN Security Council resolution by considering the Houthi militia as a terrorist group threatening international peace and security. The UAE, as a non-permanent member in the Security Council and as the chair of the Council next March, the government of the UAE, with the support of the National Assembly, is exerting all efforts to de-escalate tensions in Ukraine. We also support the return to dialogue, to negotiations, and to prioritizing the protection of civilians and respecting the international humanitarian law. We also call on Iran again to respond positively to our repetitive calls in order to find a peaceful solution to the 3 Emirati islands through direct negotiations or resorting to the international criminal law in line with the international law and other relevant regulations. We also stress the importance of stopping the occupation of the Palestinian territories and all occupied territories, and also establishing a Palestinian state within the borders of 1967 with Jerusalem as its capital in order for both states to enjoy their rights. The Middle East cannot live in peace and stability with all these nuclear weapons because
أؤكد
In conclusion, I reiterate our full commitment to the UAE's strategy to achieve zero carbon by 2015. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Indonesia, then Australia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Yang mulia Presiden Assembly, yang mulia para ketua-ketua parlemen anggota IPU, yang terhormat delegasi-delegasi anggota IPU, hadirin sekalian. 2 tahun terakhir, dunia mengalami goncangan yang berimbas pada berbagai sektor kehidupan. Pandemi COVID-19 bergulir dari krisis kesehatan menjadi krisis yang berdampak pada aspek-aspek kehidupan. Di sisi lain, pandemi membawa peluang untuk memperbarui pola pembangunan aktivitas ekonomi yang selama ini diterapkan. Terlepas dari berbagai kemunduran, pandemi memberikan kesempatan untuk akselerasi menuju ekonomi hijau
towards a green economy and a low-carbon future. We have to, together, realize a resilient, safe and healthy world. One of the ways to do this is to increase ambitions and to impede global warming. In our view, there are many critical things that need to be focused upon in order to save the Earth. First, to achieve a low-carbon economy and climate resilience, Indonesia is on track to meet its updated NDC targets, including land use net in 2030 and establishing net zero targets in 2060 or before that. In order to achieve targets in the forestry sector, Indonesia has established controls of forest fires, peats, moratoriums in primary forests and peatlands. Next is to mobilize various resources to mitigate and adapt to climate. The transition to clean energy and climate change requires support and massive financing. Indonesia mobilizes financing outside of the national budget and promotes innovative financing to achieve its NDC targets by utilizing new financial instruments such as green obligations, green sukuk, as well as issuing a number of platforms for investing in the Waka sector in climate action, among other things, making use of blended finance through SDGs Indonesian 1 and an environment to manage finances and the environment. Indonesia has also established a roadmap that mandates financial institutions to increase their green portfolios. Another focus that must be implemented is to promote innovations and breakthroughs to protect the world, primarily countries where their communities are most vulnerable to climate change. In this case, Parliament, in direct response to their people, have a strategic role in playing a solution or playing a part to solve the challenges. One of the strategic roles that can be played by Parliament is to monitor the implementation of climate commitments. Therefore, accountability and transparency is an essential component of democracy and good governance. Even in the midst of the pandemic, climate change, populism and regression of democracy is all happening. Parliament, as its main form of accountability, needs to improve its role, enhance its role in carrying out checks and balances. Indonesia's parliament continuously makes efforts to improve its system through monitoring laws, legislative products. So this is something that must be carried out, including legislation, issuing legislation on climate and the environment. Post-legislative screening is a process that is mandatory to be carried out regularly. Other strategic roles that can be taken by Parliament is establishing legislative tools or instruments that monitor national regulations. The Indonesian Parliament they are establishing laws that regulate new and renewable energy, as well as renewing laws on biodiversity to protect the sustainability of Indonesian biodiversity. Enhancements are also done so that the legislative process is done with due diligence, taking into account environmental impacts. Another important strategic role that Parliament can play is engaging the public in national debates on climate change. IPU parliamentary action plans on climate change has underlined that public participation is crucial in order to support the agenda in Indonesia, and international and public participation is very much needed in any international action on the environment. So Parliament has a role to play in all of this. Indonesia, enhancing public participation is done continuously. In Bali, for example, meetings are a way to talk about the management of forests and waters. Political support is mandatory to achieve commitments under the Paris Agreement. Aside from playing a role to bridge international agreements with the aspiration of constituents, the Parliament plays a role in developing domestic regulations. So political will is the main foundation. And so we see there are other important things, and there are things that are even more vital than that. As a representative of the people, the Parliament can make sure that international agreements on the environment prioritize climate justice. And so mitigation will be based on fair and equitable principles. The Parliament generates laws, the government makes decisions, but ultimately non-state actors will implement this. The private sector and all other parties that need representation. So Parliament needs to be the driver of multi-stakeholder action in order to achieve climate justice. So we hope to create positive change on this planet. Thank you very much. Berikutnya adalah Australia. Saya suka negara yang
Australia, summed up perfectly by Dorothy McKellar, one of our most famous poets, in her poem My Country, that was first published in 1908. As a country, Australia is all too aware of the vagaries of weather, along with the potential impact of climate change. We have been an active participant in international climate change negotiations since the 1980s, and Australia has committed to international agreements on climate change since 1992. We were a party to the Kyoto Protocol and are a party to its successor, the Paris Agreement. Australia is resolutely committed to that agreement. Australia has set a target of achieving net zero by 2050. We're on track to reduce emissions by up to 35% by 2030, well in excess of our target of 26 to 28%. But it is not only us that we are focused on. We are also committed to our regional partners, increasing our climate finance commitments, assisting our neighbours to transition to low-emission, climate-resilient economies, all whilst working alongside them to adapt to adverse impacts of climate change. We do, however, support market-led investments for the private sector to help drive climate solutions, transition energy systems, all whilst ensuring food security and industry sustainability. Australia is committed to ensuring that emission reductions are driven by technology. Through our nationally determined contribution, Australia has inscribed 7 technology stretch goals to bring the price of key low emissions technologies to cost parity with current higher emission sources and technology. This includes the cost of clean hydrogen, solar, energy storage and battery technology, green steel and aluminium, along with soil carbon measures. Australia is focused on driving down costs while still providing reliable baseload power, knowing that this is a key and practical path to accelerating their uptake, not only at home, but globally. We are working collaboratively with other countries, investing to proactively accelerate solutions and ultimately their uptake. And finally, Australia welcomes the positive outcomes at COP26, the finalisation of the Paris Rulebook, including transparency and carbon market rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia, Italy, and next to sit on the next speaker's seat, Germany.
Thank you very much. Today, all of us take it as given that environmental questions have an impact across the board, and that they belong to ordinary citizens as such, and that they are of eminent interest to the general public. The level of sensibility towards the environment is continuing to soar in society at large, and especially in the perception of younger people. This new awareness requires not only proper scientific information, but also an all-round culture of the environment. In order for this to happen, there needs to be a profound change of mentality involving the institutions, businesses, and individual people. It is estimated that between 3.3 and 3.6 billion people worldwide, almost half the world's population, live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Progress in action to adapt to climate change is not uniform, as noted by the report by the IPCC, observing that the biggest gulfs exist between low-income population and developing nations, which shoulder at least 75% of the cost of the climate crisis, despite the fact that they only generate 10% of global CO2 emissions. As recently reaffirmed in Dubai, in the context of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, chaired by Gennaro Migliore. This consideration tells us much about the complexity of the environmental transition, and especially about the real meaning of the word sustainability in its various, almost infinite aspects: environmental, energy, food, demographic, health, and social. The challenge for the politics is to understand how they are interdependent without losing sight of the objectives the most important of which is the health of the planet. But this cannot be achieved by underestimating the other goals. Europe's Green New Deal was an opportunity to steer the economy in a more sustainable direction. However, just over 100 days since the COP26 in Glasgow, Russia's invasion of Ukraine risks making policies to contain global warming take a leap backwards. Indeed, any conflict is a tragedy with enormous cost, not just in terms of human lives and the economic repercussions, but also on the ecosystem involved, leaving indelible marks in the territories that are theaters of conflicts. It is inconceivable that in 2022, less than 80 years since the end of that terrible tragedy that was the Second World War, any nation in Europe should decide to resolve its strategic security concerns, however legitimate, by means of war, moreover brandishing the spectre of nuclear catastrophe. Our dismay in having to witness a conflict in the heart of Europe with the declared aim of using armed force and without concealing the intention of redrawing the idea and the geography of the European continent demands that we shoulder a responsibility. Faced with the unacceptable military aggression against Ukraine, we cannot look the other way and close ourselves off in a selfish silence. We have to give voice to a spirit of solidarity that is not only virtual, but also concrete. This common approach, one that I hope will get the broadest possible support, is a choice in favor of courage and propriety that we have to make in the face of an explicit violation of the principles of the IPU, of the Charter of the United Nations, and of other international obligations. In this situation, we cannot afford any weak links in our determination, and we, in the IPU, have a duty to firmly reassert the close link that exists between peace and the principles of democracy, freedom, respect for the rights of people, and the self-determination of peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Italy. Next is Germany. And after Germany, next to sit on the next speaker's seat is Israel.
So, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this audience, and thank you very much to our Indonesian hosts for organizing this so important event. We are meeting here under the heading Mobilizing Parliaments to Act Against Climate Change, and no question, this is indeed the major challenge for our political generation, the major challenge for parliaments all over the world. We are all aware that we are still at the very beginning of our road towards climate neutrality. And we all know that we have to work much more intensely and harder to get even a little bit closer to reach the end of that road. The Deutsche Bundestag, the German Federal Parliament, has made it very clear that the German ecological footprint is far too big. Within the last years, we have therefore launched a wide bundle of measures to start the climate turnaround and to face other ecological challenges, such as the loss of biodiversity and plastic waste. We know we have to become faster and better, and that we carry a very special responsibility here. But we also know that all efforts in Germany are of little use in the fight against climate change is not fought successfully on a global level. Therefore, we have to cooperate. Therefore, we have to learn from each other. Dialogue among parliamentarians is a good opportunity to do so. But to be honest, we also have to provide the countries who suffer most from climate change, and especially the countries who are less wealthy, with the resources to do their job in climate change mitigation and adaptation. It is our job to do so because we know that fighting climate change becomes secondary when people have to fear for their lives because they are poor, because they are lacking food and water, adequate housing, proper medical treatment, or because they are suffering from war. And, ladies and gentlemen, being at war is what the Ukraine is facing at this moment. The people of Ukraine are victims of an aggressive Russian invasion, which cannot be justified by anything. Russia is breaking not only the rules of the United Nations, but above all, it's questioning the pillars of a rule-based world order. The war caused by Russia offends the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And if Russia were to succeed in this war, all of our territorial integrity would be harmed. And in the end, our lives and sense of freedom as we know. It would be a bitter victory of the law of the strongest, a victory over diplomacy and dialogue, and a victory over the main principles of the IPU. But it's not only about principles, it's about humans, and we should never forget. And therefore, I greatly appreciate that the IPU is on the way to make a very clear statement regarding the war of President Putin and everybody who is supporting him. And I specifically say President Putin because this is not the war of the Russian people. It's very important to make this distinction between the Russian people who are just as dedicated to peace as most people in the world on the one side, and the government under President Putin on the other side. And I'm very glad that we talk, discuss, and decide about the two topics of extraordinary relevance. The war in the Ukraine, hopefully a short-term task, and the fight against climate change, which will keep us occupied for generations to come. But I'm also grateful to learn from other delegations that we have reasonable other challenges in other parts of the world, in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. IPU is such a good opportunity to listen to each other and to learn from each other. So again, thank you all which are involved in organizing the IPU conference. We are looking forward to having good meetings and the dialogues with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Germany. Next is Israel.
Dear Speaker, dear colleagues, the most serious danger in analyzing the deterioration and the quality of the air that surrounds us here on Earth is the idea that this is a linear process. That every decade, if we do nothing, the air heats up by half a degree, so that in 100 years, it will heat up by 5 degrees. And what if it turns out that at some point the temperature increase becomes exponential? The coronavirus, which hit China in late 2019, was not particularly worrying at first. It was only when the disease began to spread exponentially around the world that countries and global health bodies began to take it more seriously. The COVID-19 vaccine became available at the end of 2020, but this was too late for the nearly 2 million people around the world who died from the COVID-related causes. Even after the vaccines were administered, in most countries they did not totally prevent infection. They are mainly important to preventing severe disease and death. We all remember that the emergency item adopted at the last IPU assembly in Madrid addressed the unequal distribution of vaccines and vaccine inequity for Africa. how on earth will we address the climate crisis if the situation drastically deteriorates? What will happen to vulnerable regions with hot climates like Africa? It is not a matter of a few years. It is a matter of generations to come. We all understand that the name of the game is the ability to store energy. Then, when energy can be generated, especially solar energy, it can be used later. In other words, how can we have solar power 24/7 and use a little energy from polluting sources like coal, oil, and natural gas? And be more specific, batteries, batteries, batteries. As legislators for parliaments around the world, we must recognize this fact and translate it into action items. First, to speed up the passage of legislation that supports milking the sun, I mean collecting energy from the sun's rays and storing it using batteries or other techniques of storage. Second, government oversight, making sure governments set goals in order to achieve a dramatic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as quick as possible. Third, all this, of course, depends on suitable and significant budget allocations. If all the countries of the world, both the developed and the developing nations, do not unite, we'll pass on this massive negative energy bomb to future generations with catastrophic effects on humanity. And number 5, aid to developing countries is crucial. A chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So what have we done in Israel? Electricity in Israel, in 2010, Israel produced electricity from 60% coal and 40% natural gas and renewables. In 2020, Israel produced electricity from 26% coal and 74% natural gas and renewables. By 2025, Israel expects to produce electricity from 3% coal and 97% natural gas and renewables. Water in Israel. In 2000, Israel did not use any desalinated water. In 2010, 10% of the water produced in Israel was desalinated. In 2020, it rose up to 25%. And by 2030, Israel plans to produce 50% of its water from desalination. And we all know how many wars were about water resources, and we have some very strong and significant examples today along the Nile. Regional cooperation is crucial in order to protect the planet for future generations. According to Israel's agreement with Jordan, Israel will purchase solar energy and will provide Jordan with desalinated water. We call on our Palestinian neighbors to join us in promoting green energy products and green energy projects, despite the terror that is still aimed at us. Because in the climate crisis, my friends, in the climate crisis, there are no international borders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Israel. Next is Seychelles.
Honorable Chairperson, SG, Excellencies, Honorable IPU members of Parliament, good afternoon. Salamat Siang. On behalf of the Seychelles delegation, I join others in thanking the host government and the Indonesian Parliament for the warm hospitality. Our gratitude goes also to the President, SG and staff of IPU for jointly making sure that this 144th IPU event takes place. My contribution to this general debate is as follows. We understand the nuances of globalization, integration, interdependence, and interconnectedness. This is why Seychelles, amongst the community of seeds, we are worried to note that our national security as seeds, and on a much bigger scale, the global security is at a progressive level of high risk. At high risk because not enough is being done to curb the emission of greenhouse gases, cutting back on deforestation activities, poor transition rate from old to new energy usage, and making us fall short of the different country pledges made from financing to national determined contributions. We note also the setbacks to achieving the SDGs by the COVID-19 pandemic and to the now armed conflict impacting on the global economy. Thus, will be affecting also planned contribution targets. We commend those countries who are on course and call on them to share the strategies. Research and development in alternative technologies and innovative solutions by countries which have the capacity to do so are at a slow pace for a number of reasons. Our very own global environment is greatly being threatened by irresponsible human actions in contrast to the principle of global sustainability advocacy. Unless precise, timely checks and unbiased mindset approaches become part of the global development processes now, this business-as-usual approach mode will persist. No longer can we hide behind excuses to the lack of scientific data and proof to support the climate change emergency facing us. I could run down a list of national ambitious actions taken by the government of Seychelles, which some are having a significant revenue value losses impact to our people. The global concern is not about what little pollution my country is making, in contrast to the emissions beyond our shores. Listening to what is being done globally in the minds of seeds, we always wonder whether it is enough. We want to convey to you all to understand and accept our vulnerability nature as small islands, and to that of LDCs amongst others. In whatever decision taking you make, not to forget us, not to voluntarily and unconsciously marginalize us in your development agenda, but to always uphold the UN values and principles of leaving no country behind. As seeds, we thank our bilateral and multilateral partners for the various support towards our national mitigation and adaptation efforts. Thank you for everything. Let us be more accountable and rethink our actions, which is a crime to humanity, long-term and progressively. It is time now for concrete political commitments of engagements for redress. It is time for model law framework to respond to the modern disasters and risks. The blame game will not help us. The continued prolonged vacillation and procrastination to do what is right should end now. Today, now, as IPU members of parliaments, let us make our pledges. Let us say enough is enough to the business-as-usual approach once and for all. In our national parliaments, let us promote bipartisan approaches to address issues of national and global concerns. Let us not allow partisan politics to divide us and delay our collective actions. No more time for this now. Let us use the Glasgow Climate Pact opportunity to collectively take a much stronger ownership role to redouble our efforts to nationally, regionally, and globally. Let us take much firmer positions to implement the national, regional, and global governance reality checks, oversight roles as representatives of the people. The target is to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees. We, members of parliaments, have an ambitious task to urgently coordinate, adopt common and like-minded legislations, similar oversight tools, and a more inclusive budgetary scrutiny strategies to make a big difference in not only taking our national government accountable, but globally to align with best parliamentary oversight practices. Let us harmonize domestic laws with international norms in directing national and global governance on track. Working in silos on this subject must stop. Intense political dialogue and engagement should be on how to deal with these technical stumbling blocks that we politicians know, but most of the time postpone, and according to us, because of bad timings. Let us unite together on this 144th IPU platform to make a point towards the future we want. Let us question the multilateral governance setup to push for a much fairer, inclusive, and democratic processes to influence the much-needed changes. Let us be brave and bold, to have wisdom, and to exercise prudence for precision in collective responses. Let us get messy by collectively putting our hands in the dough to engineer and craft our future and to ensure national, regional, and global security and hope. I go back with more determination and inspiration. Let us all, as legislators, aim for the very best balancing act with our national development plans to build more resilience and to stay on the sustainable path. May the favor and blessings of God, the Almighty, continue to guide each and every one of us for the remaining days of our work and here and back home. Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Seychelles. We will now start the special segment on the launch of the Global Parliamentary Report, after which the general debate will resume. Thank you.
Dear friends, we came to one moment, the presentation of the Global Parliamentary Report 2022, Public Engagement in the Work of Parliament. Honorable speakers and members of Parliament, this segment is very important to the IPU because it will introduce joint work of the IPU and UNDP. As normal, it is normal that a global organization of national parliaments try to promote peace, democracy, and development. And so the IPU works closely to follow and respond the great challenge and trends of our time. And always thinking on the role of parliaments to achieve it. And it is essential to understand that people need to be represented in our parliaments. And in many countries, people do not feel represented. Not just in the new democracies, but also at the oldest ones, where abstention, for instance, is increasing, showing that people are not believing in our ideals. So we need to understand what parliaments may do to change the situation. As individual parliamentarians, we have something that we need to choose, to connect people with the institution of parliament in general. We know that this is not easy, but we need to do it. We have two reports on changing the nature of parliamentary representation 2012 and Parliament's power to hold government to account in 2017. But this one is a response to the perception of a growing distance between people and their parliaments. The core aim of the present report is to strengthen the relationship between the elected and the people that they represent. We need to make sure that people's voices are heard when we make new laws and when we hold government to account. More than informing people, we need to involve them in our parliamentary work. The report provides practical guidance and recommendations to support parliaments to become more active on this, and are responsive to the public needs and expectations. Many of you have contributed to the development of this report by sharing your views, case studies, and approaches to public engagement, and so I need to say thank you all for your important contributions. I urge you now to make use of the resources that IPU and UNDP can offer in making our Parliament stronger by building ever closer connections to our public. This is the result of the report. Use this report to achieve the goals that everyone in this room believes. Now, we will see a video address from UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner.
Distinguished members of Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This Inter-Parliamentary Union Assembly takes place as our global community faces immense challenges. The world wants an immediate end to the war in Ukraine, which is causing enormous human suffering. Indeed, recent reports by the United Nations Development Programme on countries such as Ukraine, Yemen, Afghanistan and Myanmar point to a chilling trend. Conflicts, especially those that become protracted, can erase decades of hard-won development gains. And without joint action, millions more people will fall into poverty. The toll of war is often incalculable. At the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic has compounded a range of global crises. That includes planet-threatening climate change and environmental degradation, deepening inequalities and poverty, and growing food insecurity. We are increasingly confronted with a stark reality. Existing governance processes and institutions are often insufficient to address these monumental challenges. Indeed, the peaceful and inclusive societies that we need simply cannot be built and sustained without a reimagining of governance institutions. The third Global Parliamentary Report by the IPU and UNDP sets out a case for much more open and representative institutions where accountability is understood as ongoing rather than limited to, for example, an election event every few years. We know that supporting accountable, effective and inclusive governance is pivotal to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, the report shows how digital solutions hold the potential to extend vital state services to marginalized and vulnerable communities so that we leave no one behind. It shows how in turn these solutions can empower more people to have their say in vital decisions like climate action, which affect their lives and livelihoods. Together with our partners, UNDP and the Inter-Parliamentary Union will continue to provide tailored assistance to parliaments and parliamentarians across the world, which represent the very foundation of peaceful, prosperous societies. Through this support, we are committed to helping shape the inclusive, responsive and digital parliaments that are needed to stand up to the vast tests that this century is posing to our collective fortitude. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Before the presentation of the report by our Secretary General and Charles Chauvel from UNDP, we have a photo opportunity, and after it, the Secretary General will make the presentation of the report itself. Now, I will give the floor to our Secretary General, Martin Chungong, to present the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Since you were given that script, we have changed it a little bit, and I have agreed with my colleague, Mr. Andy Richardson, who is the prime mover of this report, to do that presentation in cooperation with our UNDP colleagues. So they will present to you the various findings and conclusions of the report very briefly. Thank you. If you don't mind.
No, I'm okay, no problem at all.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all delegates. We would like to briefly introduce the main findings and recommendations from the report. You'll find a copy of the executive summary on your desk, and the full report is available on the IPU website. When we asked parliaments at the IPU Assembly in Belgrade what was the biggest challenge they faced, the most common response was the gap between Parliament and the people they represent. We all know. Can I ask my colleague to put the slides on the screen, please, Emily? Thank you. And the second slide. Thank you. We all know that public engagement in politics cannot be limited to voting in elections every 4 years. There's a growing demand for regular, ongoing exchange with the Parliament that the people have elected. So we asked you, member parliaments, what you do to engage the public. And the photos that you were seeing earlier are from among the very many, the hundreds that your parliaments kindly provided, showing a myriad of different forms of engagement in action. And this global parliamentary report is really about what we learned from the conversations with you, with more than 100 parliamentarians, staff and civil society organizations. It's based on your experience and on a series of in-depth case studies which we will hear from representatives of different parliaments in a few minutes' time. And the overall objective, the reason for doing the report is to encourage
laporan global.
Deeper in their practice of public engagement. At the IPU and at UNDP, we stand ready to support parliaments by helping to share good practices and to connect you with the experience of other parliaments. Next slide, please. Why do parliaments engage with the public? When we asked the question, parliaments told us that by empowering people to participate in lawmaking, policy formulation, and oversight activities, Parliament helps to counter distrust. And by listening to the opinions of people who are directly affected by new laws, there are double benefits. Parliaments not only maintain their relevance in the eyes of the people, but they also make better laws and carry out more effective oversight by listening to the voices of the people concerned. Of course, it's the members of parliaments themselves who are the main interface between the institution and the citizens of their country through your day-to-day contact with the people you represent. But you, as parliamentarians, also help to shape the institution. You set the political direction for what Parliament should be. And what we are seeing is growing political commitment to open, inclusive, and participatory institutions. Next slide, please. So, the report analyses 5 main dimensions of public engagement to inform the public and communicate with them about what is happening in Parliament, to educate, particularly young people, about parliamentary work, but increasingly also to consult with communities on policy issues and to offer new ways in which people can participate directly in parliamentary work. And I'm almost certain that every one of you has examples of initiatives that your Parliament is doing to reach out to members of the community. We're seeing, for example, very extensive use of petitions, particularly online petitions that can lead to parliamentary debates, even to new laws. We're seeing experiments in new forms of participatory decision-making, such as citizen assemblies. At this point, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Charles Chauvel from UNDP to continue with the presentation. And the next slide, please.
Secretary-General Andy Richardson, dear delegates, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this presentation on behalf of the United Nations Development Programme and our partner, the Inter-Parliamentary Union. As Martin indicated in his introductory remarks, every few years the IPU and UNDP collaborate on a flagship project that we hope will be of interest to members of Parliament. I was a Member of Parliament myself for 7 years in New Zealand some years ago, before I came to UNDP to work on the support for our global parliamentary programme. And I remember what it's like as a Member of Parliament wanting to embrace trends, do what is being done by other parliaments in good practice areas, but finding it difficult to locate the information. And this is why we hope this global parliamentary report on improving engagement with the public will help you as individual members of Parliament and your parliamentary administrations to improve that interface, that vital interface between you as a representative of the people and the people that you represent. I think I really just want to make the 3 points here on the slide very quickly. You all saw during the COVID pandemic, I think, that one of the ways to continue to engage effectively with constituents was through digital possibilities. And I know that IPU was providing parliaments with knowledge on this matter. UNDP was working with many of you to help provide these temporary digital solutions that many of your parliaments have now made permanent as part of your rules of procedure in committee and plenary, because it is such a good and effective way to achieve interaction. Instead of bringing people to the capital to present to a committee, they can be in their home base
and interact digitally with members of Parliament. It's a great use of technology when it's well regulated and where it's made available widely to people, for example, on their smartphones. I think the second point of the report that's really important to make is that really good public engagement isn't a top-down thing. It isn't something that MPs can kind of decree. It's got to be the MPs and Parliament meeting the public halfway. It's got to be a negotiated dialogue so that it works for both sides, both the parliamentarians and the people that they're trying to reach out to and have a dialogue with. And I think finally, most importantly, is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. We found this during the COVID pandemic. What will work for one parliament and one society won't work for another culture. And so the way in which you tailor and design your means of enhanced public engagement, outreach and dialogue has got to be one that you create in your own society with expertise and advice and assistance for sure, but it's got to be a homegrown solution, not one that's imported from some other country or culture or place. Next slide, please. This slide just helps identify some of the key trends that we found when we were conducting the report through the wide consultation process that we adopted with Parliament partners in the IPU and UNDP country offices supporting parliaments around the world. It does take extra effort to do effective outreach. And one of the reasons UNDP is so keen to support this is part of our commitment to leaving no one behind and reaching those most at risk of being left behind first as part of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the short time, 8 years, that remains to us for doing that. It requires investment. This isn't something that you should embark on as a part-time, ill-funded voluntary project on behalf of some poor staff member in the Secretariat who has 5 other tasks that they do for the rest of the time during the day. It has to be a project that you really ensure has proper dedicated time and resources to it, that learns from experience in other parliaments, but as I said, is calibrated to your own parliament and your own society and your own rules of procedure. And finally, you need to learn by doing. Putting a solution in place is often a really good first step, but it won't be perfect. It never is. It's important to have feedback, systematic feedback from the people that you're trying to reach out to, so that you can improve the systems that you put in place over time and make sure that they work for them and for you as busy members of Parliament with a full schedule and fully occupied time. Next slide, please. Looking forward, when we asked our country officers and partner parliaments to tell us what they thought the most important trends in this area would be, first of all, we all know that it's hard to engage with younger people. I participated in the Forum of Young Parliamentarians yesterday. We talked about the vital importance of re-engaging with young people, including young people already in representative institutions, parliaments, and those who are active in society already. But this can be a key way, this search for new forms of engagement, especially digital engagement, in trying to bridge that gap between the cynical, busy young people in society and those in elected positions. And it's worth trying to deal with that frustration accordingly. I've already mentioned the importance of leaving no one behind and the vital possibilities that technology and digital everything that we face as our future can present as a solution in this area. A related theme is innovation. As I said during COVID, Many of you as parliamentarians found new ways of working, new ways of engaging. You had to, because you couldn't meet your constituents face to face. And many of you have chosen to make these ways of working a new and permanent feature of your rules of procedure. This process will continue come pandemic, come war, come economic collapse, whatever you might see in the future. It's vital to keep innovating and tweaking the solutions so that they work for the circumstances that you face. And finally, collaboration. As I said, this can't be a top-down exercise where Parliament says one day, oh, we think we should engage with people. It has to be something that builds on existing ways of communicating, draws on existing desires and channels that might be originated by civil society and others, and embraces all those approaches so that you have the best practice in your own society as to these interactions. Next slide, please. So really just on the recommendations, not to repeat what I've said, but lift your eyes a bit when you think about engagement. Be strategic. This isn't a tactical short-term exercise, it's a long-term project thinking about
Jadi berpikir bagaimana
improved engagement. Try to be inclusive. If there's a choice to be made between technologies that will allow persons with disabilities to better enter the physical precinct of the Parliament or interact online.
Tentu dari parlemen secara fisik atau berinteraksi online, usahakan pendekatan yang paling
example. Make it participatory, as I said, it's not top down, it has to be something that you consult about with your communities and societies so that you arrive on a platform and a means of doing this that everybody wants to engage in rather than one that they're told they must use. Think about innovative ways to do it. You won't have all the answers, neither will your consultants or your secretariat or your staff. Talk to young people, talk to old people, talk to people in rural areas, talk to people in cities about what might work for them, and they'll come up with all sorts of
lakukan atau berhasil untuk mereka, dan mereka itu bisa memberikan
them will be worth incorporating.
Sebelumnya belum pernah ada bayang.
And finally, responsiveness is vital. As I said before, whatever solutions you adopt to engagement will always require continuous improvement. And you can show that you're engaging and making the exercise worthwhile and that you're listening to what people are saying by responding to their feedback on the way in which you communicate and have dialogue with them. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand back now to Andy Richardson, who will ask you to participate in a survey.
Thank you so much. So we're talking about engagement, and we feel that it would be good to try to engage you as well, the delegates sitting here in this room, so that we can also learn about what you think. Now, on the screen, you have a large QR code. Can I invite you to take your cell phones and to scan the QR code? It will take you to a web page where there are 2 questions, because we would like to hear your views on the questions. So if you're willing, this is, we tested this out and hopefully it works. Please, all delegates in the room, please take a moment, take your cell phones, scan the QR code, and answer the 2 questions. A little bit later, we will review together the answers to the questions that are being asked. It's available in English, French, and Spanish. Before that, though, it's the moment to hear some case studies from parliaments themselves, case studies that are included in the report, and here presented by members of parliament from South Africa, Fiji, the United Kingdom, and Ecuador. So it's my honor to invite Madam Sylvia Lucas from South Africa, the Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, to come to the podium to share the good practices from South Africa in public engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson of the session, the IPU President, the IPU Secretary General, presiding officers, speakers of Parliament, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the South African Parliament, let me thank the IPU Secretariat for affording us this opportunity to be able to share our experiences on public engagement in the work of Parliament. Let me take this opportunity and also extend our appreciation to the IPU Secretariat for this most timely global report on public engagement. I also want to express my appreciation to the Indonesian Parliament and the people of Indonesia for the warm reception. This report comes at a very opportune time as the world is changing in an unprecedented scale and speed. As bureaucratic governance, law-making processes are changing in significant ways. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, as this report correctly notes, responding to these changes requires effective institutions, better and deeper engagement that is characterized by inclusive decision-making in line with the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This further underscores the importance of institutionalizing and embedding public engagement in parliamentary business, which is an apex mechanism for testing legislative ideas and assessing progress made in implementing key policy priorities. It is worth noting that the South African Parliament is counted amongst the world's leading parliaments, particularly in its development and implementation of improved public participation modalities aimed at enhancing democratic engagement with communities. But just to bring context to my intervention or my presentation today, ladies and gentlemen, it would be recalled that public engagement in the South African parliamentary context is not only a democratic necessity, it is also one of the constitutional injunctions that guide the work of Parliament. Thus, pursuant to our constitutional mandate, our South African legislative sector strategy and our quest of standardizing and harmonizing our public engagement practices as a sector, we developed the South African Legislative Sector Public Participation Framework, which was adopted by the Speakers Forum in 2013. The sector framework became the overarching guideline, putting in place norms and standards for public participation within the legislative sector. The sector framework also sought to facilitate the development of common minimum standards and guidelines in order to improve a shared understanding of public participation throughout the country's legislative sector. With the recognition of the need to operate within a structured framework, Parliament and provincial legislatures were then required to develop and align their own public participation models with this sector-wide public participation framework. It was against that backdrop that during the fourth democratic parliament as a national parliament, we embarked on a process to develop our own model, which seeks to outline and mainstream norms and standards for public participation processes in Parliament. And I must explain that our Parliament consists of two houses or two chambers, that is the National Assembly as well as the National Council of Provinces. Our efforts culminated in the adoption of the South African Parliament's public participation model by the joint rules on 15 November 2017. But our efforts did not end with the adoption of the model. Over the years, we have developed and mainstreamed a number of public participation mechanisms, which include but are not limited to the following. That is provincial weeks, where particularly permanent delegates to the National Council of Provinces goes back to their provinces to visit and do sightseeing and to make sure that they engage different sectors. Local Government Week, where we have a specific focus on local government oversight, taking Parliament to the people. Now, taking Parliament to the people is a model that was perfected firstly in the provinces but also in the country, where for a whole week parliamentarians will visit different constituencies, and at the end of that week we will have a feedback by government in the presence of all parliamentarians. We've got oversight weeks, and that is when all committees visit different areas which have been reported by departments to the different committees to make sure that there is indeed something happening where it is so reported. Sectoral parliaments, where we meet with all the different sectors. We've heard from the UNDP representative how important the issue of engaging and involving the youth are in Parliament's work. That is one of the sectors that we have a standing arrangement with, that we do have annually, quarterly engagement with. And that is part of our sectoral parliaments. Women, youth, people living with disabilities, and you name them. As well as a petition system through which the public can present written submissions to our Parliament. These mechanisms come together to act as a vehicle through which Parliament carries out and provides for meaningful public involvement and participation in its legislative and other processes. Particularly important, these public participation mechanisms deepen accountability from members of the executive and to assess progress made in implementing key policy priorities. These sessions are usually concluded with a very important feedback loop intended to keep our communities informed of the outcomes and undertakings emanating from our public participation activities. The IPU's 2022 Global Report on Public Participation also recognizes that public engagement has many dimensions, including information, education, communication, consultation, and participation. In the same vein, when it comes to public engagement in the South African context, we cannot just talk about public participation mechanisms such as taking Parliament to the people without mentioning the important role of other support structures which form an integral part of our evolving public engagement architecture. These other public participation support structures include our parliamentary constituency offices, our parliamentary democracy offices, as well as education offices. These structures do not only assist with broadening the nature and scope of our public involvement work, but they also provide a comprehensive framework for institutionalized engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, as I am going towards conclusion, let me emphasize the important interface between budget allocation and public participation. The appropriate resource allocation also impacts on the quality of public participation engagement undertaken. It is also important to institutionalize and embed a monitoring and evaluation mechanism in parliamentary public participation practices, looking particularly at our experiences with conducting self-assessment and independent impact assessment. I want to mention that this became, the issue of budget and other resources became particularly pronounced during the lockdown period through COVID-19. The use of technology, where free movement was inhibited, required an injection of resources. The utilization of virtual meetings to stay in touch with our people assisted us particularly as South Africans to remain, as the Parliament of South Africa, to remain in touch with our constituency in the prolonged period of lockdown. This, we should acknowledge, was not a smooth transition, but it became pretty much the order of the day by now. I would also like to agree and align myself with the view shared in the report that the following are some of the salient lessons and best practices that can be drawn from our public engagement experience as the South African Parliament. The importance of being context sensitive, of aligning practical actions with cultural and historical context, the importance of translating constitutional vision into institutionalized frameworks, the importance of creating convergence between public engagement frameworks, periodic flagship programs, regional initiatives, institutional mechanisms, and support structures. The centrality of budget, costing and or resource allocation to public participation programs and creating synergies between implementation of institutional strategies, performance plan, and rollout of public participation models, and the importance of linking oversight and accountability to public participation. And moreover, as a South African Parliament, we welcome and support the findings and recommendation of the report, particularly on the need to be strategic, inclusive, participatory, innovative, and responsive. Lastly, as recommended, we are also prepared to embrace a paradigm shift by embedding the key tenets of sustainable development to our parliamentary business by, amongst others, taking young people seriously, leaving no one behind, working collaboratively, prioritizing gender-sensitive engagement to ensure equal participation of women and men, and leveraging on the opportunities and prospects for technological transformation heralded by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Kia leboga, enkosi. Thank you very much. Baie dankie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces of South Africa. The next case study will be delivered by the Speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of Fiji, the Honourable Ratuapeli Nailatikau, apologies, who cannot be here in person due to the complexities of travel at the current time, but who has sent the following video message. Thank you.
We recognize and support the fundamental principles of effective institutions and inclusive decision-making embedded within the 2030 agenda. Therefore, our civic engagement and education work is also aimed at enhancing public engagement with the Parliament and parliamentarians so that we become more participatory, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of our citizens. Our public engagement initiative is well narrated in the report. I need not repeat here some of the key undertakings and achievements of this initiative. I, however, wish to highlight that the pandemic has affected our civic engagement and education programs from 2020 until now. The lockdowns, isolation, and social distancing measures, so crucial to Fiji's pandemic response, compelled us to cut back on our community outreaches, parliament tours, school visits, and education programs. While COVID-19 had forced us to redirect our civic engagement initiatives onto our website and social media platform, the use of technology for these purposes was already in place since the revamping of our website in 2017. I have highlighted before that our investment in our IT and broadcast systems has ensured the continuation of some level of engagement with Fijians, keeping them informed of Parliament's business and at the same time offering them an alternative form of engagement with parliamentarians and the standing committees. Despite the pandemic, we have ensured some continuity in our civic engagement and education programs, albeit through electronic and virtual means. In fact, the pandemic has taught us many lessons, including the need to increase the array of tools that we need to use to enhance Parliament's engagement with the community. Fiji's COVID-19 response has produced positive outcomes with the opening up of our border, relaxing of social distancing measures, and a high vaccination rate. As we observe an improving situation, we are adamant to restart our face-to-face community outreach, education, and public engagement programs. We are revamping these programs. Parliament tours are on again, and our civic engagement and media team has already started its work. As Speaker, I will actively participate in this endeavor. In recent years, we have noticed an increase in misinformation and misconception about Parliament and parliamentary processes, particularly on social media. We are committed to using our civic engagement and community outreach initiatives to address this, enhance public interest in Parliament, its mandate and processes. It is also crucial this year as Fiji heads into elections and the convening of a new term of Parliament. We need to ensure that Fijians, especially young Fijians who are voting for the first time, have a better knowledge of Parliament and its processes. We also need to strengthen citizens' awareness about Parliament's important lawmaking and oversight functions when it comes to current challenges like the pandemic, climate change, and so on, and encourage Fijians to participate actively in the parliamentary processes rather than being part of a passive audience. In conclusion, our public engagement initiative, as contained in the report, is a work in progress. We have more to do. We have learned some good lessons, and we will endeavor to continue forward with innovative and effective ways to enhance this important undertaking of Parliament. I thank you.
The Speaker of the Parliament of Fiji. Thank you. The third case study comes from the United Kingdom. I'd like to invite to the stage Madame Harriet Baldwin, the chair of the British IPU group.
Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues from the IPU Secretariat, dear fellow parliamentarians, it is an enormous honour and privilege to be joining our friends from South Africa, from Fiji and Ecuador in talking about public engagement between Parliament and the people that we represent. And I would like, as one of the old democracies in the world, to invite all of you to meet in our central lobby in our Parliament building, because that is the location of one of the oldest forms of public engagement. The central lobby of Parliament is a place where any member of the public can come whenever Parliament is sitting and summon their MP using the green card system to lobby them. Indeed, that is where the word originates. And I thoroughly endorse the excellent report that our colleagues have put together and its recommendations. And we are constantly conscious of the need to widen and deepen our engagement with the public, not just as members of Parliament ourselves, but there will be initiatives from the government, initiatives from political parties, initiatives from civil society, educational institutions, and of course from the institution of Parliament itself. And because this is an IPU report, I want to focus on the work that Parliament itself does. It's staffed by impartial civil servants. And the work that they have done has identified 5 main groups who are most disengaged from Parliament. As we've heard, the first of those is young people. The second is women. The third is people from minority backgrounds. The fourth is people with disabilities. And the fifth is people with lower skills, educational attainment, those who are long-term unemployed. And the focus has been very much on reaching out in the direction of these people. There are 13 regional outreach officers who work on tailored programs with partners who are trusted in those regions. The big landmark event every year is Parliament Week, which engages 1 million people. There's been a huge effort to communicate in plain language, but to communicate extensively, whether it's on broadcast, and everything is broadcast, committee meetings, all of the sessions of Parliament, but also the resources of the House of Commons Library, which is a good source of facts. And then we built a few years ago the most wonderful education centre, which creates for children a replica Parliament where they can actually experiment themselves with debating and so on. And the digital accessibility has, of course, had to increase significantly over the period of the pandemic. The last 2 years have thrown us some terrible challenges where we had to close the building for a period of time, we had to reduce the amount of activity, and we had to go almost completely online at one stage. We've also suffered shocking terrorist attacks on members of Parliament. We have lost 2 dear colleagues, Joe Cox, Sir David Amess, 2 acts of terrorism in their constituency. And these 2 things have, of course, become a challenge to some extent to engagement with the public. But we are determined to use technology to address that, whether it's through online sessions, whether it's through digital learning resources, whether it's by putting a virtual guided tour available to everyone. But the thing that I think has been, as a Member of Parliament, the most effective in engaging the public, and that I want to just highlight, is petitions, online petitions. If an online petition reaches 100,000 signatures, then it automatically qualifies to go forward to the Petitions Committee as a topic that may well be debated in Parliament. Not only has that been a good way for the public to raise issues, it's led to debates in Parliament, and then, of course, it also creates a database of emails where we can then engage and tell people what happened with that issue, what the development was, what has happened. And it has been effective in changing the law in my country. So I hope that I have shared a few examples in one of the oldest democracies in the world of how we're updating and trying to innovate to create engagement with the public whom we serve. And I strongly endorse all of the work that's gone into this report and the recommendations. And I repeat my invitation to all of you, dear friends, to come and lobby and join us in the central lobby of our Parliament next time you are in London. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this example from the United Kingdom. And the final case study comes from Ecuador, and I'd like to invite Madam Wilma Andrade, Member of the National Assembly. The floor is yours.
Muy buenas tardes. Thanks to the government of Indonesia for their welcome and for hosting the IPU, and thank you for giving me the floor. This is my first presentation, in fact, so I would like to express greetings from the Ecuadorian Parliament, a South American country with 7 million inhabitants and a variety of geographic areas from the Pacific coast, mountain ranges and a forest with great biodiversity, as well as the Galapagos archipelago, which is a UNESCO heritage site. There are 5 members of Parliament here that I am leading who are committed parliamentarians, committed to inter-parliamentary cooperation that this great organisation promotes. It's also an honour to state that since November I have been named as the second Vice President of the Forum for Women Parliamentarians for the IPU, so allow us to express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, in particular with the President of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians of the IPU, our colleague Vasilenko. I must state that climate action should be integrated into all sectors. In the case of Ecuador, 8 days after lockdown, Parliament was one of the first in the regions to implement virtual platforms for sessions for Commission and the legislative body, as well as to create an electoral system for passing laws and resolutions. We approved regulations for votes and passed 22 laws, and even elected a Vice President of the Republic. We also managed to carry out processes for state ministers. There are various challenges for digital platforms: implementing language that's easy to understand, avoiding information that has gaps, capacity building for civil servants in Parliament, having implementation plans to prevent virtual attacks as well. The Parliament in Ecuador has as one of its key aims implementing the ideas of an open Parliament, which are transparency, access to information, accountability, citizen participation and ethics. The law that regulates the civil service in Ecuador recognises the existence of the parliamentary group, which I am honoured to preside over. Parliamentarians present statements or declarations of their assets at the beginning and at the end of their mandate, and also we regulate conflict of interest to ensure that personal assets don't have any conflict for legislators. We also have to declare economic activity that parliamentarians have carried out over the past few years, 5 years before their position. We've also created an app in the National Assembly which contains legislative information updated in real time. Every year we publish an accountability report. We have also actively participated with civil society, and we've done this through the co-creation of a legislative roadmap and the Open Parliament Action Plan. In addition, we have legislative levels in each province to receive citizen requests. All laws should be debated, and in the first 5 days we need to call on all stakeholders from the public, academic, manufacturing and citizen sectors anyone who benefits from this legislative proposal. Furthermore, when laws are applied or when they involve projects in indigenous areas, we need to have prior consultation. Now we're looking at the functions of state through the open parliament in Ecuador. Without doubt, there's much more that we can do, and of course many more challenges to overcome. However, we are working under the principles of open parliament. Thank you very much, esteemed colleagues, for your attention.
Thank you very much to our esteemed speakers for their observations and sharing case studies with us from their own parliaments on public engagement. Dear delegates, it's now our opportunity to review the results of the survey in which you participated. If those results could now please be put on the screen. Drum roll, the moment of anticipation. Here we go. So in respect of the first question, I think we saw a positive result. You reported by a majority that public engagement had increased over the period in question. And I'm assuming that this was partly pandemic related, a response, but also hopefully part of a positive general trend toward a desire for greater engagement. So this is very positive, and I think it bodes well for the reception for the report. In respect of the second question, where you were asked to name groups with which you thought it would be important to improve engagement, you identified young people, women, members of minorities, rural communities, and in fact, a good number of you said all of the above. So I think, again, this is a very good signal in terms of the understanding that you all clearly have of your communities, that, you know, a concerted effort to engage not with just those from whom you always hear, but with other communities is an important part of keeping representative democracy healthy and leaving no one behind. Dear delegates, we're now almost at the close of this session. It's an honour to hand over for closing remarks to the esteemed Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, I hope I may say my friend, Martin Chungong, with whom UNDP treasures its collaboration. And if I may just say one thing in closing, we've launched the Global Parliamentary Report number 3 here in your presence today, but we have plans for a large online forum at the end of next month that we're going to publicise to all of your parliaments and to our UNDP country offices, where we hope over 2 half days to be able to discuss the report and its recommendations and implementation in greater depth. So please do stay tuned and tune into that. Without further ado, Martin.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you. We deeply value your cooperation and cooperation with UNDP. Yes, we have now come to the end of this special segment of the Assembly here in Jakarta, where we have launched the 3rd edition of the Global Parliamentary Report. As you've just heard, it focused on parliamentary engagement with the public. We've heard that it is important for Parliament to inform citizens, but it's even better to involve them in the work of Parliament, because it makes sense to improve upon democratic processes. It makes sense to reduce the distrust that exists between the people and their governors. It makes sense because it improves upon policy outcomes, it improves upon the effectiveness of parliamentary work. And so we have just heard the findings of the survey a moment ago, which prove the point that has been made, that it is important for Parliament to be continuously engaged with the citizens. I want to use the opportunity to thank all those members of Parliament who have come up here to present good practice in their parliaments and countries of how they are engaging with citizens, to what effect. And what we have learned is that this report is not only about abstract definitions, abstract recommendations, but it's about things that are actually feasible. So we've heard of all this good practice, and we hope that it will be emulated by the parliaments here. So we have this report. It's more than just a report. It is also, I think, a call to action. It is intended to encourage you, members of Parliament, members of the IPU, to do more in engaging with your citizens for the reasons that we have mentioned. So if we can make an appeal to you, we can call you to action. There are 4 points that we would like you to take with you here. First of all, we would like you to undertake to go back home and review or seek a review of your Parliament strategy for public engagement. We would also like you to consider joining the network of engagement champions and speak up for public engagement in Parliament. We would like you also, as I have said before, to share good experiences, good practices with other parliaments. We would like you also to contribute to positive change, because parliamentarians are the main stakeholders who shape the political system, and it is in your hands to make Parliament a responsive, participatory institution through more effective engagement with your constituents and citizens at large. Thank you very much for participating in this special session. And with that, I consider that we have now formally launched the parliamentary report, the 3rd edition, which, as we say, focuses on engagement, parliamentary engagement with citizens. Thank you very much. I believe you will now continue with the general debate, and I believe my colleagues are moving up to the podium here to take over so that you can resume the normal deliberations of the Assembly. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Sonia Farad. Nice to meet you.
Merci, merci, merci. Merci Andy, c'était joli. You made...
Good evening, parliamentarians and representatives of the different delegations here this evening. I will be chairing the Assembly tonight, and my name is Sonia Parag. I am a Minister of Government from the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, South America. And I'm also here with my delegation, who is Speaker from Parliament, Guyana's Parliament, along with others. So tonight we will be starting with, or resuming the session, the earlier session. And we're beginning with Estonia, followed by the Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So may I ask that the Speaker of Estonia take the podium and that the representative or speaker for the Democratic Republic of Congo take the next seat. Thank you.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues,
honorable hosts. I'm very pleased to be here today and to attend the Assembly on behalf of the Parliament of the Republic of Estonia. It's great to see that we all share a concern and sense of responsibility for creating a successful and sustainable world. Indeed, tackling climate change appears to be a pressing challenge for every country, but we should take it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to modernize our economies and ensure sustainable growth. The Parliament of Estonia plays a key role in coordinating multi-level cooperation in all sectors of a society. Democratic participation in combating climate crisis is built on mutual trust, accountability, and equality. One of the key issues is the engagement of youth. Young people as equal partners to decision makers are a valuable contribution to climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to draw your attention to the situation that the Russian aggression in Ukraine has forced onto the world. I realize that I'm not original in saying that the world we knew does not exist anymore. Unfortunately, it's absolutely true what the speaker from United Kingdom said on Monday. It's illegal and brutal invasion. It's not only a war between Russia and Ukraine, it's a war between the authoritarian and the free world. It's a war that concerns all of us. That's why every one of us needs to pick a side. Even indifference makes indifferent a party of the war. More than 10 million people have fled their homes in Ukraine. It's 1/4 of the population of Ukraine. 90% of them are women and children. They are escaping from bombing. Is this only a small conflict, dear colleagues, or is it war? Russia's victory would mean a continuing aggression against the next democratic countries. Ukraine and Ukrainians are fighting for the world peace. Ladies and gentlemen, back to the topic. Native Americans have a saying, we have not inherited this earth from our forefathers, we have borrowed it from our children. This ancient maxim defines the scope of our responsibility in simple and clear terms. Living at the expense of nature today means living at the expense of our children and grandchildren. That's not acceptable. Nature knows no state borders. Environmental damage from hundreds, even thousands of kilometers away reaches us, all of us, sooner or later, to a lesser or larger extent. In the eyes of nature, we are all one big family, which is why only together, through joint efforts, we can create a better and more sustainable future, an environment where our children and grandchildren will also thrive. Dear parliamentarians, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has set new challenges in environmental protection also. I'm not talking about the bombings or the criminal abuse of resources or the direct harm caused to the environment. I'm talking about the challenges or gaps this has caused, for example, in energy supply, mostly in Europe. An easier but ecologically more harmful solution is a wider reintroduction of fossil fuels. However, often what is easier for human beings is a problem for the environment. European Union has approved ambitious objectives in achieving climate neutrality, which have been jeopardized by the war. The best way to avoid this is through cooperation. When we have a problem, you help us, and when you have a problem, we help you. This system should function like communicating vessels. Today's discussion is a reminder to all of us about the intensifying environmental degradation across the globe. We must recognize that nature has no borders. The air we breathe, the water we drink, and the land we inhabit are a responsibility, all of us. Every human being has a right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. That's what I wish all of you, dear colleagues. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Estonia. We'd like to have the Democratic Republic of Congo, followed by Finland. Finland, can you take the seat?
Thank you to the organizers. Who are present today for the wonderful setting they're offering, and thank you to the Indonesian people for their hospitality and the welcome they provided us with. Dear fellow parliamentarians, for several decades, the Parliament of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in symbiosis with its government, has spared no effort to reflect on the problem of climate change and to initiate material actions that should lead to sustainable solutions that not only meet the resolutions of the COP26, but also fit with our position as a solution country. To this end, a number of material acts are being carried out, including the urgent need for the Parliament of the Democratic Republic of Congo to examine the draft law on the rights of indigenous peoples. This law will have a real positive impact insofar as it provides for the establishment of counterparts to the indigenous peoples who are being mutualized as guardians of the ecosystem and the stratosphere through the mechanism of maintaining the secular character of harmonious relationship that these communities maintain with the fauna and flora. 2, the establishment of coercive and compensatory mechanisms to fight against the decrease in biological diversity, soil, air, and water pollution, the destruction of the ozone layer, the decrease in soil fertility, desertification, the depletion of fishery resources, and the deterioration of natural and cultural heritage. 3, the creation within our institutions of a specialized service attached to the Presidency of the Republic, a ministry within the national government, and a standing committee of the Parliament, all in charge of the environment, sustainable development, tourism, and natural resources. The Parliamentary Commission specifically focuses on the mission of control, evaluation, and anticipation through projects of revision of the national legislation. This willingness is also evident in the recent statement by the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, His Excellency Félix Antoine Tshisekedi, who said climate change poses a threat to people and their fundamental rights. Our action in favor of the climate and the green economy constitutes the basis of our future, and our development is not necessarily a necessity, but an urgent obligation for a peaceful and sustainable future. Dear colleagues, parliamentarians, beyond the national system that the Democratic Republic of Congo has put in place, its position as a solution country through the Congo Basin with its peat bogs that contribute to the maintenance of biodiversity, its tropical forest, second in the world after the Amazon Basin, its hydroelectric potential of 100,000 megawatts and, in other forms, 90,000 megawatts of renewable energy, its subsoil, which abounds in strategic mining resources, notably cobalt, coltan, and germanium, which are used today in the automotive industry for energy storage. All this leads it to want to contribute more and actively to the resolution of the problem of climate change. Dear colleagues, parliamentarians, the Parliament of the Democratic Republic of Congo notes, 1, the urgent need to establish within the Inter-Parliamentary Union a task force to fight against climate change around the 3 largest forest countries. And I quote, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Brazil, and Indonesia. 2, the acceleration of the mechanism for the creation and establishment of the World Environment Organization, and which the Parliament of the Democratic Republic of Congo reiterates its request made at the parliamentary hearing of February 17th to 18th in 2022 at the United Nations headquarters in New York to host the headquarters. 3, strengthening the Green Climate Fund and entrusting its management mainly to the solution countries mentioned above. Dear fellow parliamentarians, I cannot end my remarks without urging our contemporaries, inspired by the recent mobilization on the COVID-19 health crisis, to be more committed and determined by linking actions to words. It is more than time to minimize or even contain as much as possible the phenomenon of inexorable evolution that is climate change. We all deserve an ecological environment where life is and will be beautiful for our contemporaries and future generations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Finland will now take the podium, and I may now ask Kazakhstan to take a seat.
Madam President, dear colleagues, climate change, the loss of biodiversity and the overconsumption of natural resources are the most serious problems facing humanity. Climate change is causing expanding misery and wars, forcing masses of people to leave their homes. There are already more than 70 million homeless people in the world. The UN predicts that this number will be more than tripled. Protecting our climate, stopping and slowing down climate change is not just something we do in good times and in rich countries, and we can't break free from this goal when other problems arise. We need to act quickly, globally, and above all, together. Finland's goal is the most ambitious in the world. We want to be carbon neutral in 2035. When future generations, my children, ask what you did to stop climate change, I would respond to them. We started the fight to stop, slow down and adapt to climate change. We set the goal of reducing and getting rid of fossil fuels. We abandoned the energy use of peat. We promoted climate-friendly housing, mobility, industry and agriculture. And we made a climate law to ensure continued work and progress during future governments toward the carbon neutral goal. Already, the Finnish government has made the largest climate investment in our history, by directing half of the European Recovery and Resilience Facility's resources to combating the climate crisis. This means €1 billion for projects to combat climate change. We have supported the exit of households from oil heating and thus managed to halve the number of oil-heated houses. For the strategic program of the circular economy, Finland has for the first time set the goal of reducing the overconsumption of natural resources, which is the root cause of the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity. The goal is that in 2035, the total consumption of domestic primary raw materials will not exceed the 2015 level. To achieve this, we will support companies and accelerate the circular economy by increasing research, innovation, development and investment. With Russia's completely unacceptable attack on Ukraine, the rapid green transition has also become a security issue for us. During the current government, Finland has also spent more money on nature conservation than ever before. History has shown that lasting solutions to the climate and nature crisis must be found through cooperation, not conflict. Setting a carbon neutral target for 2035 has been a turning point in the participation of society as a whole in climate work. Business has become an advocate of clean solutions. Now, for many companies, climate action has created new business opportunities and they are pushing the government to act faster and more firmly. Still, not all businesses, employees and residents will benefit from green transition in its first phase, and therefore fairness of transition is important. In this sense, even we have to be better, more fair and more proactive. But we have to remember, we have no options. Not only is climate change affecting the nature, causing extreme weather events, natural disasters and food and water shortages, but it's also accelerating wars and refugee waves. Finland has done and is doing a lot, but even we still need more actions. We are also a small country of 5.5 million people whose actions alone are not enough. That's why I call on all of you, every country and every parliament, to fight climate change because together we can make a difference. I have a good understanding of the different circumstances, living standards and starting points in various countries, but I would like to remind you that poor countries have the most at stake. With the right attitude, with courage and open-mindedness, with transparent society, education, pro-tax collection and fair democracy, developing countries can also make big steps towards a green transition and, on the other hand, avoid the many mistakes the developed countries have made. It's also important to remember for us all that doing nothing costs more. We need everyone and all of us for the climate work. Let's take care together that our children can be proud of their parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Finland. Speaker of Kazakhstan.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all participants of this event on behalf of the Parliament of the Republic of Kazakhstan. I came from a country where it is -40 in winter and +40 in summer. Right now, in our capital, the temperatures is about -20. We extract approximately 70% of the electricity generation from coal. But despite this, we are making efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change. Combating climate change is one of the priorities of Kazakhstan. Already today, we feel the consequences caused by global warming. Kazakhstan ratified the Paris Agreement in 2016. In it, we declared our unconditional national contribution to reduce emissions by 15% by 2030 from the 1990 baseline. Moreover, with the additional international support, we are ready to reduce emissions to 25%. This indicator is also reflected in the strategic development plan of the country until 2025. At last year's Climate Ambition Summit, Kazakhstan declared its intention to achieve carbon neutrality by 2016. Its strategy carbon neutrality is currently being in the process. It aims to reflect both the economic and social benefits for the country from the transition to low carbon development. The strategy will guide the deep decarbonization of the economy and set the foundation for the action to achieve the 2060 target. Considering Kazakhstan's economy is energy intensive, this is an important step for our country. In addition, the Glasgow Climate Pact, adopted following the 26th Glasgow Conference of the Parties, calls on parties of the Paris Agreement to review their indices by the end of 2022. We are now updating them and working on a roadmap to 2025 for its implementation. This other main mechanism for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is our national greenhouse gas emission trading systems, ETS. It includes major energy, industrial, chemical and mining companies. The ETS has now been improved within the framework of current environmental legislation, and the environmental legislation provides the introduction of a green taxonomy for environmental assessment of green projects. This will stimulate the introduction of green technologies in the country and ensure the effective functioning of financial support. Undoubtedly, rapidly rising temperatures require urgent and coordinated actions on climate change adaptation and mitigation. To strengthen international cooperation and reduce negative impacts, climate change adaptation standards have been implemented in our legislation. This will create an effective system for building local resilience to climate change. The implementation process will begin with a full vulnerability assessment in the most vulnerable sectors. Based on the results of the assessment, sectoral government programs will be able to address climate risks and develop the necessary adaptation measure to climate change. Over the next 5 years, we are going to plant 2 billion trees and increase the absorption of greenhouse gases. Consequently, this will curb desertification due to climate change. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. I'll now invite San Marino to the podium, followed by Suriname.
Madam President, honorable colleagues, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Bali authorities for their hospitality and for the organization of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly. The COVID-19 with the lockdown has show how human activity and economic development without a change of direction enormously affect emission. Any positive action taken risks be thwarted and conditioned, as we have unfortunately seen, also by destabilizing factors such as a war that impose emergency choices and which affect the autonomy of countries, starting with the energy factor. The Republic of San Marino doesn't have its own energy resources. Therefore, renewable energy sources represent the only valid alternative to guarantee a minimum of energy autonomy for the country. The government, with an incentive system, pushes toward renewable energies through the promotion of photovoltaic, solar therm, heat pumps, and high-efficiency cogeneration. This system opens the way to future initiatives and activities linked to the green economy thanks to the diffusion of the green culture in the population. The energy plan currently in force, which is in line with the contents and global objectives of the Paris Conference, aims at a transition toward a future of renewable energy only. Thanks to its modest size, San Marino has the possibility of becoming one of the first countries in the world with zero or even carbon negative emissions. The low carbon ecosystem project is being studied for the creation of an ecosystem of incentives for the adoption of sustainable behavior by citizens, also thanks to blockchain technology. The Republic of San Marino promotes sustainability and inclusion policies that are the basis of the general town plan for the planning and management of the territory, with a series of actions for the qualification of the existing building heritage and urban regeneration. The plan must involve the expectations and needs of citizens towards and shared vision of urban development. The fight against climate change means food security, sustainable agriculture, and the progressive conversion to the practice of organic crops and farms. Agricultural multifunctionality is encouraged, and social awareness is improved in terms of acquiring correct eating habits and combating food waste. San Marino is really a small country compared to the great of the earth, but as parliamentarians, as governments, we can implement many useful regulatory interventions, but what can make the difference to speed up the process is to listen to the advice of our young people, who should and invoke the responsibility of their governments. It is therefore necessary to involve citizens and the new generations, but it is essential that multilateralism and global cooperation speak only one language and pursue the same goal. The world has come together to fight a pandemic, and despite conflict and wars, we must not stop talking and find shared solutions to the problems that affect us all. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, San Marino. We may now have Suriname. Followed by Czech Republic.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the floor. Let me, on behalf of the National Assembly of Republic of Suriname and my delegation, express my expression to the people and Parliament of Indonesia and the IPU for the warm welcome and for hosting this in-person meeting in Nusa Dua, Bali, under challenging circumstances. Madam Chair, distinguished colleague, the world has not completely defeated the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change remains the biggest challenge the world has to deal with. The impact of climate change could eventually eclipse the current crisis caused by the COVID pandemic. In recent months, we have witnessed the impact of climate change, such as deadly flooding, widespread forest fires, and huge rises in global temperature. On the top of this, the world is facing the Russian-Ukraine crisis with rising tension and far-reaching consequences for the world economy and its people. Our thoughts are with the victims of the Russian-Ukraine crisis, and we welcome all initiatives that meet regional realities to have real negotiation for a possible peace agreement, and especially to adopt the proposed resolution in our Assembly, which expresses the voice of many here and the ones we represent to stop the war. We are also thankful for the opportunity to make a contribution to the theme of the meeting, which well chosen and timely as climate change becomes more and more concerning. We concur with this forum that underlining the importance of this theme, how our parliaments mobilize the awareness of climate change worldwide and its challenges due to the fact that Suriname is a huge risk area of effects of the climate change. In this regard, we recall with pleasure the regional seminar on climate change and disaster risk reduction for parliaments of the Caribbean, which seminar was held in November 2018, and together with the IPU, and the results, the conclusion, and the recommendations to the attention of the global parliamentary community at the 104th IPU Assembly in Doha. Since Parliament has an important role to play in everything that has to do with climate change plans and climate change legislation, allow me to present an overview about the way in which Parliament of Suriname deal with this climate change issue in our diverse, peaceful, and colorful Republic of Suriname in South America. In case of my country, because we are very particularly vulnerable, even though we have contributed the least to this problem. For those who are not familiar with my country, Suriname is the greenest country on earth. It's home to 550,000 inhabitants, a wide ethnic and cultural diversity, 10 forest-dependent tribes, over 200 forest-dependent communities, 14.8 million hectares of tropical forests, which means 12.9 hectares of forest per capita, and 10% of the world's river freshwater. Suriname is a carbon-negative society, storing 11 gigaton and absorbing more than 8 million tons of forest carbon every year. This means that with such a surface of carbon storage and annual carbon absorption, Suriname is providing a key ecosystem service to the planet and the global community. However, due to climate change, we have now become one of the most vulnerable countries. Insufficient stores of gold, oil, and other valuable minerals. Tsunami exchange in rainfall pattern and rising temperatures are leading to increased health risks, associated costs, decrease in hydropower production, and reduced access of river beds. Ladies and gentlemen, I think part of the climate change treaty is about protection of Suriname forests, which absorb a large amount of CO2 emission. In the environment framework, law has to be established in the sense to know that no mangrove must be felled, and instruction about where no land should be issued. We have a lot of commitments to do. It is crucial for our parliamentarians to tackle this issue in this area and to take action, particularly in terms of legislation. We do need to change our behavior and act now, for we don't have any other problem, any other planet to live on. We should work together to deliver for the people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. It is not only about us, but it is more about the coming generation. We have to take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Suriname. We now have the Czech Republic, followed by Spain.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, let me share a few remarks with you regarding the climate change topic in relation to the Czech Republic and the present situation. I am sure that we are all aware of our responsibility to the future generations to hand over the world in the best possible condition. I really highly appreciate all the commitments of countries as mentioned in the previous speeches. Therefore, the European Union, of which the Czech Republic is a proud member country, has been preparing the so-called European Green Deal, aiming towards climate neutrality in 2050. However, as we can see now, some of the assumptions of this plan are challenged by the present Russian aggression in Ukraine, as Russia has been an important supplier of gas and oil to Europe. It is also crucial to stress that the war of such an extent as happens in Ukraine may itself be a threat to the climate, apart from being a huge cause of human suffering. Just imagine the amount of infrastructure needed to be rebuilt after the damage caused by the Russian army. And there will be many more necessary investments related to refugees in hosting countries. This all would lead to a lot of CO2 emissions. As the Czech Republic will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union in the second half of this year, we will definitely need to address these issues and try hard to find viable solutions. Solutions on government and parliament levels, solutions not only on the scope of the EU, but also on a global scale, and as we are all people living in only one world. Therefore, please note that a high-level dialogue on protection of nature and sustainable agriculture, organized by the Czech Ministry of Environment and Czech Embassy here in Jakarta, should take place here in Indonesia in September as a side event to the Czech presidency of the Council of the EU. Its goals are to implement EU strategy for cooperation with the Indo-Pacific region and to exchange experience and discuss our roles in conservation of endangered species and fight against wildlife trafficking, including necessary forensics. To finish my speech, let me express my thanks to Indonesia for hosting this great IPU event. I hope our meeting will help to facilitate international debate about peace, climate change, and other important topics. I wish it for all of us, especially to people of Ukraine and other regions hit by violence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Czech Republic. We'll now invite Spain to the podium, followed by Yemen.
Dear President
All right,
of the
so I
Assembly.
apologize. We're asking Austria. We've invited Austria to the podium.
Okay, so thank you very much for giving me the floor. At the outset, let me thank the Indonesian hosts for their hospitality and the hard work that we have the chance to meet here. It's not easy to organize in difficult times, in times of global pandemic, such a huge conference. It was good for me to hear from my Czech colleague that they will use their presidency of the Council of Europe to bring this issue forward on the European level. But that's not enough. We have to focus on these issues around the global. And here, dialogue is important, but more important, of course, is action to stop this global warming. Last year, 2021, was one of the 7 hottest years on record. Climate change is unfolding in front of our eyes. And it is one of the biggest challenges in these days, and I'm sure in the whole century. Since 1992, when we had the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro and the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has been on the political agenda. But it seems we have not been able to succeed in the last 30 years. And we don't have much time left. We have to act now on all levels, in our communities, on the regional level, on state level, and what we are doing now on the worldwide level, mitigating climate change. We are facing barriers to effective climate action. Global environment agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, are non-binding and thus lack the teeth to punish those who fail to deliver. On the national level, we do often focus on quick success. Every one of us has to run to be re-elected. But to be successful in our fight here in climate change, we need long-term commitments. And sometimes it's not easy to do the right for the climate and to be successful in the elections, because we have to ask our citizens that they change their life, their style of living. And this is not easy to convince the people. And there are not easy solutions. And here we have, as parliaments around the globe, the chance to be successful. Firstly, as policymakers, we don't have to wait for the annual global climate summits. We can act now with our national, with our domestic legislation. Parliaments must make full use of their powers for a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, through exercising oversight, lawmaking, and what is very important, allocating public resources. Parliament can directly contribute here. And the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic offers us an historic opportunity for a green transition. But not only the pandemic may pave the way. Many European countries, like Austria, we depend on imported natural gas from Russia. 80% of the gas we are using is coming from Russia. And more than ever now, we see that it is better for our security to get rid of such a big dependence on fossil energy. And green policy is here, and we have to see it also, security policy around the globe. And I think each country should do all to get more independent, using all the facilities you can have. For example, we in Austria, we are very rich of water. We have to use water power plants, solar energy, wind energy. And secondly, as representative of institutions, we should bridge the gap between the government and our citizens. And so here in Austria, we involve our citizens. We have a climate protection. We had a climate protection petition in 2020. And now we have a representative citizen assembly, a so-called climate council. And our citizens are directly involved in the work with our government. And here the people can directly support our government. And last, what I want to mention, the Austrian Parliament is now under reconstruction. It is a very old historical building, and we use this renovation also that the Austrian Parliament is a best practice in climate neutral procurement. And coming to an end, I think dialogue is important, but concrete and strong actions in all our countries, regions and communities are decisive for a good future for all of us, for the whole mankind. So it's good that we have this theme, getting to zero, mobilizing parliaments to act on climate change on our agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Austria. Yemen, can you take the podium, followed by Cabo Verde?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, may peace and blessings of God be upon the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. Mr. President of the IPU, General Secretary, Head of the Indonesian Parliament, Heads of Parliament, Heads of participating delegations, I salute you all. Climate change is one of the main challenges facing the world today. It is a main threat to our livelihoods our ecosystems, our water resources, infrastructure, and the global economy. Therefore, governments, companies, and societies should work together in order to control the greenhouse gases emissions. They should also decrease as much as possible the impacts of climate change. In the future, in order to avoid the expected dire consequences that would undermine development goals, we should be able to enact new laws and new legislation that creates a general framework for policies that mitigate the impact of greenhouse gases. We should modernize societies and transition to greener societies. We should also set mechanisms, legal and executive mechanisms, in order to combat the unprecedented impacts of climate change in a way that promotes confidence between all parties and deals with the interests of all parties while relying on renewable sources of energy. Ladies and gentlemen, today in Yemen, we are facing a real environmental crisis. There is an oil carrier that has more than 1 million barrels that has not been under maintenance for over 7 years because of the war. This might cause a leakage of oil in the Red Sea. This would endanger transportation means all over the world. The Houthi militias have not committed to their pledges when they said that they will allow a UN team to maintain this oil carrier. They also captured a sea that has the UAE flag, in addition to carrying out different terrorist attacks in the Red Sea. They booby-trapped vessels, and they also organized attacks that impacted civilians and infrastructure in Yemen and in neighboring countries. They also were an obstacle to people reaching humanitarian assistance. They also promoted women oppression and violence. They also recruited children and used landmines. The Arab League and the Arab IPU, in addition to Arab interior ministers and the EU, put the Houthi militia on the blacklist. They also categorized this militia as a terrorist group. In addition to this, they also applied measures related to the prohibition of weapons, and they froze the assets of these people because they are threatening peace and stability. Through democratic change in the militia-controlled areas, this democratization is threatened because the militia is using violence and is also organizing checkpoints to oppress freedoms. This group is affecting the whole society. It's affecting daily life. It is also causing great damages to the culture of tolerance. The Yemeni society is not able to seek democracy in the presence of these terrorist groups. The parliamentarians should mitigate these dangers. My country is witnessing an ugly terrorism perpetrated by the Houthi militia with their extremist principles. We should praise the role of the alliance, or at the forefront of which are Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They called repeatedly on the Houthi militia not to use violence and to commit to the national dialogue and to the Gulf Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, despite what my country is going through, our primary cause is the Palestinian cause and the suffering of the Palestinian people. Their houses are being destroyed. They are witnessing arbitrary attacks. We are with a Palestinian state, with Jerusalem as its capital, in order for the Palestinian people to live like all other peoples in peace and stability. I would also like to express my thanks and appreciation to the Indonesian speaker for her invitation and for organizing the 144th IPU Assembly in these difficult conditions, whether we are talking about wars or the impact of COVID-19, etc. I would also like to thank the head of the IPU and the General Secretariat for their efforts in organizing the IPU's General Assembly. I wish you all success, and I hope that we will get to recommendations that serve the ambitions of our peoples. Assalamu alaikum.
Cabo Verde, followed by Latvia.
Senhora President.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be in this assembly here in Indonesia, a very hospitable country, to present the situation and concerns and the vision of my country, Cape Verde, on climate change and global warming. Earth, our planet, our home, is going through difficult times and deep change. The imbalance is obvious. The consequences are increasingly worse, violent, intense, and frequent. Floods, droughts, storms, forest fires, migration, destruction of soil, and lack of water are the main impact, and the way in which we live has to be reviewed. We have to face sacrifices. We will lose some well-being, but there's no alternative. The resources and the ability to resist the aggression are reaching the limit. We do not have planet Earth 2. We have to act, and act now, collectively and together. Madam Chair, Cape Verde is a small island state in development with a semi-desert climate where the impact of climate change have been felt for a long time. Sources of drinking water are few, our water resources are few, we have very small food production due to lack of rain, due to insufficient arable land. On the other hand, we are surrounded by water on all sides, ready to be used as long as we can remove the salt. And that's what we've been producing. These desalinization plants, increasingly bigger plants. We pollute very little, but the consequences of climate change have a big impact on our islands. Our resilience is enormous, the size of the challenge and threats that we face. We know that we have to be part of the solution and facing a lot of shortages, especially financial and technological ones, but we are committed and motivated. We accepted commitments to reduce carbon in transport, and we're working so that in 2030 the production of renewable energy will be larger than 50% of our needs in electricity. We are developing a national strategy to reduce the risk of catastrophes, and we believe that the blue and green economy are the way forward, sustainable and with real measures to safeguard our biodiversity. Many solutions in a sea of problems which affect mankind, but we will do our duty. Madam Chair, Your Excellency, fighting climate change is an urgent challenge which requires immediate action, courageous action, and effective from each one of us so that we can have a global result which is satisfactory. No further time to lose, no further time to hesitate. We have to be more ambitious, more pragmatic, and more far-reaching. For that, all opportunities have to be used so that we can be positioned in favor of defending life and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Cape Verde. We'd like to have Latvia at the podium now, followed by Turkey.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the most experienced delegates will probably remember that this is the second IPU assembly to be held in Nusa Dua. The previous one was in the spring of 2007, and the theme of the general debate also was on climate change, global warming, 10 years after Kyoto. At that time, we concluded that climate change had affected humanity 3 times in the recent millennia. Today, the threats posed by climate change has been compounded by the threats of a real war raging in Europe in the 21st century. And it is very likely that some of today's grandiose climate neutrality plans will be even harder to achieve now. But we, like-minded people, still need to think positively and look to the future rather than live in the past. Dear colleagues, Latvia has committed to reach climate neutrality at national level by 2050. The government has approved the number of documents essential to move forward the climate change agenda. First, Latvia's strategy for achieving climate neutrality by 2050 includes climate neutrality, multifunctionality of agriculture, the development of joint renewable energy projects, circular economy, hydrogen technologies, cultural cooperation, and minimizing environment footprint. Latvia is fully committed to reach the EU's greenhouse gas emission reduction targets of at least 55% in 2030 compared to 1990. Secondly, National Energy and Climate Plan 2021 till 2030. The long-term objectives of this plan is to promote the development of a climate-neutral economy by improving energy security and public welfare in a sustainable, competitive, cost-efficient way based on market principles. A comprehensive energy efficiency plan is being developed for more efficient production, transition of renewable energy, especially wind and solar energy, improving energy efficiency, modernization of power infrastructure, and increasing electricity interconnection are measures for greater gas emission reduction in energy sector in Latvia. Innovations and technologies related to tackling climate change is a key factor in developing new policy initiatives in different sectors. More active involvement and cooperation of science businesses is needed to achieve climate targets through synergies between different financial instruments, public support mechanisms, and private financial resources. The Latvian Recovery and Resilience Plan in climate change investments provide use of electricity and renewable energy sources in transport, the public and private sectors, use of renewable energy sources in energy, etc. Ways should be found to increase carbon capture in the land through forestry and peatlands. Forests are the main source of CO2 capture. In Latvia, we extract peat and produce peat substrates, which is the most effective soil material for tree seedlings. In 2020, the Baltic Assembly adopted communique on the Baltic solidarity and cooperation in times of crisis and recovery, calling on the countries to improve the cooperation to make economies more sustainable, resilient and better prepared for the challenges posed by the green and digital transitions. Create a common ground fostering the transformation of the whole Baltic region. Dear colleagues, immediately after the first day of the brutal war started by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, the Latvian Parliament adopted a statement on the sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine, strongly condemning the military aggression by Russian Federation. The first statement was followed by the others and by the other different actions in support of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the unprecedented and bloody war is still going on. Therefore, Latvia, as all like-minded countries and nations, continue to call on other international community to provide political, economic and technical support to Ukraine. We continue to call to the Russian Federation to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Latvia. We'll now like to invite Turkey to the podium, and the final speakers for this evening will be Vietnam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Climate change has become one of the most challenging global crises of our world that we are facing altogether. Regardless of the development level, no country is immune from the negative effects of this global change. The science is unequivocal. Climate change is about to become the greatest challenge faced by humanity. There is no vaccine for climate change, unfortunately. The only way to combat this change is to act together and establish close cooperation globally in a sincere manner. We need to decarbonize our world immediately. It is crystal clear that achieving net zero target requires a comprehensive transformation. We should keep in mind that no country or sector could bear this burden alone. We're not all starting from the same point. In this regard, this climate finance and technology transfer are extremely important to achieve net zero. Developed countries need to support developing countries with adequate financial and technical means for their transition process to ensure that no one is left behind. As committed developed countries, achieving $100 billion annual climate finance target and stepping up this target in the years ahead will pave the way for reaching net zero target. We need to ensure that all countries, developing countries, and have access to the climate-related finance programs and technology transfer without any obstacles. On the other hand, we should bear in mind that this transition should not constitute an impediment for the sustainable development of these developing countries. With this understanding, transition needs to be in a fair, sustainable, affordable manner. As members of Parliament, we have a crucial role in establishing a fair legislative framework for achieving net zero altogether. Parliaments can also actively contribute to the establishment of close cooperation and partnership among countries in exchanging experience in reaching this target. Being aware of the urgency of climate crisis, Turkey is determined to fight against this challenge. We ratified the Paris Agreement as a testimony of our sincere determination to this end. Our President announced our net zero target for 2053 and our new green development reform, we're very excited about it. We started the necessary preparations for the long-term strategies and action plans to be adopted in accordance with net zero emission target for 2030 and 2053. We adopted the Green Deal Action Plan aiming to facilitate our transition to a more sustainable, greener economy in line with the European Green Deal objectives. I would also like to underline that we have a very strong agenda in Turkey to deploy renewable into our electricity generation mix. Turkey is currently ranking 5th in Europe and 12th in the world in terms of renewable installed capacity. Our share of renewable resources in our installed capacity in electricity generation is currently 54%. Right now, we're working on our new electric car, which will be a contribution to this aim as well. Forests are crucial instruments for reaching net zero target. We give utmost importance to increasing and preserving our forests. In the last 18 years, we have increased our forest areas from 20.8 million hectares to 23 million by planting 5.2 billion seedlings. We have initiated the Breath for the Future campaign for a greener future on November 11th, 2019, which is our National Forestation Day. And in 2019, 13.5 million trees were planted simultaneously across the country, which carried Turkey into the Guinness Book of Records in terms of planting the highest number of saplings in 1 hour. We are organizing this campaign with the participation of different countries every year. We invite you to join us. In addition, we have a zero waste project under the auspices of our First Lady, Her Excellency Emine Erdogan, which started in 2017. Within the context of zero waste project, we aim to increase recycling rate of waste to 60% by 2035. As I'm concluding, I would like to state that our national efforts will give momentum to global climate action efforts. As a responsible member of the international community, we are ready to work in close cooperation with our partners in reaching net zero target. Please join us, plant more trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Turkey. And finally, we have Vietnam.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, climate change is now a red alert for humanity, threatening global food security and biodiversity, depleting natural resources, and exacerbating poverty, social inequality, instability, and conflict in the world. These severe challenges require all countries to urgently strengthen their commitments, reduce greenhouse emissions, and pursue a path of green, sustainable, and inclusive economic recovery. The pledge of net zero emission by 2050, it is a great significance and a common goal for almost every country, including Vietnam. Vietnam remains committed to cutting down on fossil fuel dependence, increasing the share of renewable energy, striving to chart suitable transformation roadmap toward a green, circular, and low-carbon economy, and realizing its international climate commitment, including at COP26. In 2020, the National Assembly of Vietnam adopted a law on environmental protection, containing one chapter on climate change response. Also, the National Assembly plans to conduct oversight to urge active implementation of the national commitments at the COP26. In the effort to fight climate change, we put the people in the center at the subject proposed to drivers of climate action, leaving no one behind. We look forward to further cooperation and assistance from international partners through programs and investment projects in climate action and sustainable development. To advance parliamentary climate change action toward net zero, we wish to make the following proposal. First, Parliament must urge the government to take strong and effective climate policies, chart the course toward net zero target as per COP26 commitments, and enhance their oversight of SDGs implementation, especially the SDG 13. Second, Parliament should step up cooperation based on the principles of fairness, shared but differentiated responsibilities, taking into account the capacities and circumstances of each country, especially between members' parliaments, the IPU and international organizations, to call on additional resources, share experience, provide assistance, and build capacity for climate actions. Developed countries should continue to take the lead in realizing their pledges and provide financial and technological assistance to developing countries to respond to climate change. Third, Parliament should put more effort on revising and updating laws, strengthen their budgetary oversight and allocation capacity to ensure the successful realization of their national climate emission reduction and net zero targets, taking into account the capability and development of each country. Fourth, the IPU should cooperate with the UNFCCC Secretariat to work on the mechanism for oversight and exchange of information, experience, and best practices in implementation of national commitments. Fifth, the parliamentarians need to live up their mandate as the people representative. It is important to inform the people and businesses of the long-term benefit stemming from engaging in global climate initiative, encourage private-public partnership, foster business innovation, and call for public support and share actions. I believe with that strong political determination and effort from all the members' parliaments, we shall meet our important target in climate action, recovery, and development for the well-being of our peoples. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Vietnam. Dear delegates, before we close the general debate for the evening, we have a request for a right of reply from Iran. Iran, you have 2 minutes from your seat.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Most Merciful.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the delegation of Islamic Republic of Iran reiterates Iran's full sovereignty over the Iranian islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tam, and Lesser Tam in the Persian Gulf, and rejects categorically any claim to the contrary. As it has been reiterated regularly, the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran over the said islands is not negotiable. We underline that the measures undertaken in those islands by the Iranian officials have been always conducted based on the principles of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran has always pursued a policy of friendship and good neighborliness with all neighboring countries. In this context, the Islamic Republic of Iran stands ready to interact bilaterally with the relevant officials in the United Arab Emirates with a view to strengthening the relations in various fields and also resolve any possible misunderstanding by the other party. Moreover, in relation to the reference made in the statements of few delegations, the Parliament of the Islamic Republic of Iran wishes to stress that the only historically and universally recognized correct name for the sea between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula is the Persian Gulf. Therefore, any use of fabricated or incomplete names for that body of water is totally groundless, absolutely unacceptable, and of no legal, geographical, or political value. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I wish a good evening to all of you. This ends today's activities, the debate for the General Assembly, and we will start again tomorrow at 9 a.m. So have a good evening.
climate crisis is generational injustice, and you have the power to create and implement smart, just, and holistic legislation.